It's March 21st, 1999. The who's who of Hollywood is filing in to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, where they're going to be sitting for 4 hours. Just a month prior, the nominees for each of the 24 Academy Awards was announced. As the hours drone on, people make their way up to the stage to accept their awards. 2 movies in particular are having a fantastic run, winning 12 awards between them. The first is Saving Private Ryan, directed by Steven Spielberg, the best-known director of our time. The movie follows a group of soldiers on a mission to find and return the titular Ryan to the United States, where he can reunite with his mother, who has already lost several sons. The second is Shakespeare in Love, directed by John Madden. The movie follows Shakespeare amidst a love affair with someone that he eventually writes into one of his plays. Finally, we get to the most important award of the night, Best Picture. Saving Private Ryan has 5 awards, Shakespeare in Love has 6. Everybody knows who the winner is going to be. Harrison Ford, a friend of Steven Spielberg, has the honor of announcing it.
And the Oscar goes to Shakespeare in Love.
That's not what anyone was expecting. Shakespeare in Love over Saving Private Ryan? Even Harrison Ford purses his lips in surprise. Some people are ecstatic, most of all this guy right here. That's Harvey Weinstein, the now disgraced producer. In the lead up to the 71st Oscars, Weinstein had put an unstoppable machine into motion. There have always been arguments about why someone was nominated when another person wasn't, or why a movie won Best Picture when the obvious choice lost. But Harvey Weinstein's pursuit of the award was more relentless than anyone that came before him. And the funny thing is that it wasn't new. In fact, if you look at the Oscars history, you'll notice that Oscar bait movies and a venal pursuit of the award is as old as the award itself. Weinstein was just the most aggressive pursuant so far. In this video, I want to explore the origins of the Oscars, the nomination and voting process, and what Weinstein did that was unlike what had come before. MGM co-founder Louis B. Mayer was once the most powerful man in Hollywood. In the late 1920s, he was afraid of 2 things, which would lead to the foundation of the AMPAS, or the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. First were the unions. They were getting more powerful, especially the Actors Union. To head them off, he wanted to get each branch of filmmaking under one umbrella. Producers, directors, actors, writers, even the people that wrote title cards. The Academy would cover them so they wouldn't need another union, or so the thinking went. The second issue was the censors. People in government and the church thought that Hollywood was a hive of scum and villainy. High-profile deaths like that of Peg Entwistle, Olive Thomas, and Virginia Rappe did not help that image. Mayer took a united we stand approach, figuring that the Academy could stand against both the unions and the censors, successfully retaining its fiefdom in Southern California. Well, that dream did not last. The Academy was established, but adopted self-censorship through the Hays Code less than a decade after its founding in 1927. The code spelled out things that you shouldn't do, like show an interracial relationship or insult priests, and things you should be careful of, like making out. The unions came into effect pretty quickly as well, most notably the Screen Actors Guild in 1933 and the Directors Guild in 1936. The Academy Award was, frankly, something of an afterthought, a bauble. The first awards were a private 10-minute affair where the winners were announced in advance. People were amused, but nobody took it too seriously. Adolph Zukor, who produced what was basically the first Best Picture winner, Wings, didn't even bother to attend in person, sending a pre-recorded message instead. But, like Napoleon said, quote, "It is with such baubles that men are led," end quote. What began as an afterthought overtook the ignominious intentions the Academy began with and became its most public aspect. The Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences is a professional organization. It's by, of, and for the people that work in the entertainment industry. And if there's one thing people want, it's recognition and validation from their peers. Oscar bait movies and the ambition to win an Oscar are only younger than the Oscars' existence by a few years. In Oscar Wars, Michael Schulman recounts that a director as well respected as Frank Capra was driven by a desire to win the award. When he was told that the Academy only votes for quote-unquote RD junk, Capra said that he would make RT junk. Capra was very candid about it too, saying quote, "Some years the awards were paradoxical, but those that grabbed off little statuettes didn't give a hang how they got one. They just knew an Oscar tripled their salaries and zoomed them to world fame. Salary increases didn't work up my appetite, but world fame? Wow. I salivated morning, noon, and night." End quote. These early years are when many of the things we associate with the Academy Award started. When Capra said he would make RD junk, he was essentially saying he would make what we call Oscar bait, or a movie that's attuned to win Oscars. When Bette Davis lost Best Actress for Of Human Bondage, but won it a year later for Dangerous, a movie that she did not like, she basically received the mea culpa Oscar, even though she thought someone else should have won, saying quote, "There was no doubt that Hepburn's performance deserved the award. These mistakes compound each year like the original lie that breeds a bunny. Now she should get it next year when someone else may deserve it." End quote. We can all think of Academy Awards that seem more like apologies for not recognizing somebody's talent sooner. These are all aspects of the Academy Awards that we're used to now, and none of them are new. Sometimes the right nominee wins, sometimes they don't, but all nominees want it. So, how do nominations work? There are a few eligibility requirements. A movie needs to be released within the calendar year. It needs to be a feature length. It needs to play for 7 consecutive days at a qualifying theater. A producer or distributor needs to fill out a submission form. The film needs to be submitted before the cutoff date, which is usually in the last couple months of a year, and so on. There are 18 branches in the Academy now for fields like acting, writing, directing, and more. While anyone in any branch can nominate a movie for Best Picture, branch members can only nominate their peers for specific awards. For example, someone in the director's branch can nominate another director for Best Director, but they cannot nominate someone in the actor's branch for any of the acting awards. Basically, they need to stay in their lanes. Nominations are ranked choice, and each category needs to clear a magic number threshold that's determined by how many voting members are in the Academy for Best Picture and how many are in each branch for awards relating to that branch. Ballots are sent and nominees are ranked first to last. Nominees that exceed the magic number by getting the most first place votes move on to the next round, while those with the fewest are dropped. Eventually, you arrive at a shortlist with 5 nominees for each category except Best Picture, which gets 10. Final voting is a bit different. It's mostly first past the post, where whoever has the most votes wins. Anyone can vote for anybody else. They don't need to stay within their own branch like they did for the nominations. This means that the director's branch, for example, can also vote for who they think should win Best Actor or Best Actress or Best Makeup and so on. The only exception is Best Picture, which is still ranked choice. There, members will rank each nominee from favorite to least favorite, and it'll go on until there's a winner. That period between the nominees being announced and the voting taking place is what we're most interested in for this video, though. That's where the campaigning happens. Oscar campaigning is now an industry unto itself, and there are actual strategists that help individuals and companies best decide on a plan of attack. The Academy even has a document that spells out what you can and can't do. It used to be that people campaigned in a more polite way. They would take out ads, send out screeners, and plaster billboards. But nobody really went over the top. Nobody until Harvey Weinstein, that is. Harvey Weinstein, alongside his brother Bob, co-founded Miramax and created the modern Oscar campaign. Over his decades in the industry, Weinstein had built a reputation for being something of a son of a bitch.
And now you fuck me! Do you know who I am? You're gonna beg to get back into the pizza business!
He's trying to do it.
Ah, fuck you! You and that fucking kid! The two of you are about to go down a river of shit! You hear me? That's it! You're finished! I will never offer that kid a fucking job again! Barry Gold's gonna catch a snack, too!
Fucking Harvey.
This was before all of the sexual abuse convictions. He was rude, abrasive, demeaning, interfering, sabotaging, and just an all-around bastard. One example that had all of his terrible hits was the movie Mimic, directed by Guillermo del Toro, who's been described as the complete opposite of Weinstein, a good, decent human being. Mimic was Del Toro's first American movie, and Weinstein wouldn't let him make it in peace. As the producer, he tried to tell Del Toro how to direct the movie, and would even try to get him fired. Mira Sorvino, who would also be harassed by Weinstein, stood up for Del Toro. Weinstein would spread rumors about how quote-unquote difficult Sorvino was to work with, essentially blackballing her from getting work in the industry. Peter Jackson would affirm this, saying that Weinstein told him about Sorvino's quote-unquote difficulty, which played a part in her not getting cast in the Lord of the Rings movies. Del Toro was blunt about his experience on the movie, saying, quote, "The only time I have experienced bad behavior, and it remains one of the worst experiences of my life, was in 1997 when I did Mimic for Miramax. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible experience," end quote. Bruce Feldman, who ran the Oscar campaign for Schindler's List for Steven Spielberg, said this of Harvey Weinstein, quote, "He doesn't have any humility. He doesn't have any sense of propriety or proportion. None," end quote. And that lack of shame, that burning ambition and desire to prove himself, is what drove Weinstein and helped him rack up hundreds of nominations over his career. Weinstein was at the forefront of the 90s, the indies decade in movies. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Kevin Smith, Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Peter Jackson, and more all got their big breaks in the industry thanks to Weinstein, who was willing to produce films for men that were as ambitious as he was. The same year as Schindler's List, Weinstein was trying to get awards consideration for The Piano, a drama directed by Jane Campion. His efforts during the nomination process paid off handsomely. The Piano earned 10 nominations and won 3, including Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Original Screenplay. Steven Spielberg took home the gold for Best Director and Best Picture that year. But things would turn out very differently 5 years later. Weinstein learned early on what others neglected, that in order to receive, you need to ask. That artistic merit, though a nice sentiment, isn't going to win you the gold when everyone else also has artistic merit. Though one can often argue that one movie or another should have won an Oscar, it's rare to hear that a movie didn't deserve to be nominated for a category at all. There are just too many voting members for it to be reasonable that you would be able to woo all of them to the degree needed to cinch a nomination or win for a movie that isn't in some way deserving. That's part of the rub with the Shakespeare in Love versus Saving Private Ryan fiasco. Both are good movies. By this point, decades after the Oscars were created, they represented the same things: publicity, fame, recognition, and a bigger paycheck. Weinstein was styling himself after the legendary producers, Harry Cohn, Louis B. Mayer, Irving Thalberg, and more. A lot of them were creeps like Weinstein, so the similarities weren't far off. To get a better idea of what Harvey Weinstein would do to market his movies, one need look no further than a screening of Pulp Fiction at the New York Film Festival. During the screening, a woman had screamed out for a doctor because a man had fainted. Weinstein had sent the man home in a limo and resumed the screening. The consensus was that he had set it up to draw attention to the movie. Eventually, Pulp Fiction would get nominated for Best Picture and have to run against Forrest Gump. And this is where we see Weinstein start the aggressive campaigning he became so well known for. He didn't have the same budget as larger studios. To make up for the budget deficit, Weinstein had to hustle. He would visit the Motion Pictures retirement home where some older Academy voters lived and try to get each of them to watch Pulp Fiction and vote for it. On future films, according to Oscar Wars, Weinstein would go so far as to entreat his employees to get people's ballots and vote on their behalf for Miramax films, which is, of course, entirely unethical. The tactics would quickly begin to annoy people. Miramax was pushy, first calling people to watch a screener copy that they sent and then following up to get their thoughts. Unfortunately, it was something of a tight feedback loop as well. The tactics worked, which meant that the movies got nominated, which meant that their box office returns increased, which meant more money for Miramax and more awards recognition, which meant that they would continue to push and pursue the tactics. These tactics, alongside the usual billboard and advertising campaigns, helped The English Patient walk away with 9 Academy Awards and a $230 million haul at the box office a couple of years after Pulp Fiction lost to Forrest Gump. Steven Spielberg, meanwhile, was the total opposite of Weinstein. Though he wanted an Academy Award as badly as anybody else, He had been in the business for decades before he finally won for Schindler's List. He didn't believe in the campaigning. Spielberg was of the opinion that most abide by, that the work should stand on its own merit and not require politicking. That meant that Terry Press, who ran marketing for DreamWorks SKG, had her work cut out for her. It took prodding from his partners at DreamWorks before Steven Spielberg even began to do press for the film while it was in theaters. But when award season rolled around, he stuck to his guns. Let Saving Private Ryan stand on its own merit. It was a strategy that, for once, should have worked. Here was a masterwork of a film from the best-known director of the 20th century. It had one of the most harrowing scenes in any film, and perhaps the greatest battle sequence ever committed to film. It had made $500 million at the box office, and critics loved it. How could it lose? Spielberg and Saving Private Ryan's competition was Shakespeare in Love, a crowd pleaser. As Schulman describes in Oscar Wars, quote, "It was light, it was frothy, and it was about love and creativity instead of war and sacrifice. And it was about actors, by far the largest branch of the Academy. It was Shakespeare in Love, and the crowd absolutely adored it," end quote. Weinstein also took a producer credit on the movie, meaning that if it won Best Picture, he would get his very own statue. The PR machine started heavy. Hillary Clinton was at the premiere for Shakespeare in Love and praised Weinstein before sitting beside him for the film. He was relentless. He plastered the trades with ads, ran radio spots on a dozen stations, distributed brochures, arranged personal screenings for people of importance that he thought could then sway others, and more. In Oscar Wars, Schulman says that so much was going on, even people that worked at Miramax didn't know all the angles that were being worked. Again, some of their entreaties went beyond what was allowed. They almost got in trouble for arranging an improper reception for Academy members, and quickly had to invite non-Academy members in order to make sure it was alright. Weinstein even tried to get journalist Lynn Hirschberg to drag Saving Private Ryan in the press. This was one of the severest breaches and part of why the campaign was considered so dirty. Weinstein would do the things that others wouldn't. When he was called out on his dirty tactics, he would just deny it. But other journalists would corroborate the story, such as Peter Bart at Variety. The dirty campaign was an open secret, with articles in the New York Times and New York Magazine. Weinstein had bet that the Academy would not care. He was right. Spielberg still refused to quote-unquote get in the mud with Harvey Weinstein. Schulman describes Terry Press, in charge of Saving Private Ryan's Oscar campaign, as fighting with one hand tied behind her back. She described it as a war, but played it straight. They re-released the movie in theaters to generate buzz and ran ads. They stuck with the traditional model. Weinstein, meanwhile, was creating a new one. And it was working, as Shakespeare screenwriter Mark Norman noted. He would go to parties and people would tell him that they voted for Shakespeare in Love, but that Spielberg would win. But considering they all told him that they voted for his movie, who was voting for Saving Private Ryan? The answer, it turned out, was fewer people. On Oscar night, Spielberg would win for Best Director, his 5th nomination and 2nd win in the category. Then Harrison Ford came out to announce Best Picture, and the DreamWorks team thought that they had it in the bag. They were wrong. The perfect made-for-TV moment, Steven Spielberg being handed his 2nd Best Picture win from one of his good friends, was dashed. Instead, the man that had an orc modeled after him took the stage while viewers politely clapped, though many were surprised. Schulman captured the mood perfectly in Oscar Wars, quote, "Something had gone deeply wrong. In Hollywood, the bad guy wasn't supposed to win," end quote. The campaign had firmly enmeshed Harvey Weinstein as the bad guy. Worse, they felt, was that he had corrupted the process permanently. One of the worst aspects of all this is that it obscures what is, for all intents and purposes, a good movie that had more going for it than people realize. As Schulman lays out in Oscar Wars, it did better on VHS than Saving Private Ryan, quote, "showed Hollywood a mirror of itself in which every writer was a potential Shakespeare," end quote, showed a woman succeeding in a man's world, and was a nice escape from real-world troubles, something that movies have always been. But the dirty campaign would paper over what it had going for it, only for people to associate it with a corrupt win. Of the win, Bill Mechanic at Fox would say, quote, "It's no longer about the material or the merit. It's about how much money you spend," end quote. Another exec compared it to a political campaign. Both were right. Weinstein's machine would alter how movies would win the top prize permanently. While there was always some degree of schmoozing, he turned it up to 11. the schmoozing, character assassination, borderline bribery, and, in some cases, flat-out corruption, laid out a template for others to follow, though perhaps to a lesser degree. Most people aren't as comfortable being as abusive and as bullying as Weinstein was, which is, I suppose, a good thing. After the win, the scene had irrevocably changed. Oscar strategists were now a thing. DreamWorks SKG was the first to learn from its mistakes. Terry Press would take no chances nor any prisoners. She spearheaded a massive campaign on behalf of American Beauty in the 5 weeks leading up to voting the following year. In the weeks leading up to voting, there was no clear frontrunner and every vote counted. They were up against Weinstein again this year, but came prepared. American Beauty walked away with 5 wins at the 72nd Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Cinematography. Press helped recreate the feat again at the 73rd Academy Awards, where Gladiator also walked away with 5 wins. Live Q&As were a part of this campaign and would become a part and parcel of press tours going forward. At the 73rd Academy Awards, another DreamWorks co-production, A Beautiful Mind, won Best Picture, Best Director, and more. The difference between how DreamWorks operated and Miramax did was stark. Miramax had a budget deficit, so they made up for it with sheer hustle. DreamWorks had plenty of money and used that to their advantage, carving out winners where none might exist prior, while never getting as low as Weinstein did. None of the films each represented were bad, insofar that no art is bad. But whether or not it won on merit or as a result of campaigning was the question. At the very least, every movie going forward would have an asterisk next to it. Did it win because it deserved to win, or did it win because the studio is able to throw enough money at the problem? And that's how it's been ever since. Bill Mechanic was right. It's about how much money you spend, and that spend is now cumulatively likely to be in the 9-figure range across all films. Even as viewership for the Oscars decline, and desire for the prize continues to increase. It still means something professionally to those who work in the industry today, whether financially or as validation. Will it change? Who knows? Can it change? I don't think so. Even Netflix, which represents Hollywood's greatest challenge since the advent of television, abides by the Academy rules in order to get their films submitted for consideration and has spent tens of millions campaigning for its films. It turns out everyone wants that little gold statue.